Remember when a movie made every kid want to learn how to throw a punch, fall in love, and recite Sonny's wisdom like gospel? Well, released in 1993 by Savoy Pictures, A Bronx Tale starred Robert De Niro, Chazz Palminteri, Lillo Brancato Jr., Frances Capra, and Taral Hicks in her first film. This flick became a classic coming-of-age crime drama for the 1990s. Set in the Bronx during the 1960s, the movie followed young Calogero, or just C, a kid caught between two powerful father figures, Lorenzo, his hard-working bus driver dad, and Sonny, the charismatic neighborhood mob boss who made danger look cooler than it actually was. Today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about A Bronx Tale. And stick around for number 1, because the most heartbreaking part of the entire movie isn't even on screen. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hype this video up. It helps YouTube show this to more retro movie lovers just like you. All right, now you can't leave. Let's get into the countdown. Number 15, Chazz Palminteri walked away from $1 million to protect his story. In 1988, Chazz Palminteri was bouncing drunks out of a Los Angeles nightclub by night and chasing acting gigs by day. Then, he wrote a one-man stage play about his Bronx childhood. He took it to a small LA theater and watched Hollywood lose its collective mind. Studios came swinging. The opening bid landed around $250,000, then $500,000, then a cool $1 million. Heavy hitters jumped in too. Al Ruddy from The Godfather, Ray Stark, Jerry Weintraub, who reportedly hunted Palminteri's home phone number down to make his offer before the guy could even put his coffee down. And there was also a small catch buried under all those zeros, though. The studios wanted someone else writing the screenplay, and someone else had to play Sonny. Their reasoning was that Palminteri wasn't bankable enough, which is Hollywood code for, now we love your story, but please go away. A struggling bouncer with empty pockets still told him no, every single time. He wasn't handing his life over so some squinting A-lister could pretend to be his childhood mentor. Then, one night, Robert De Niro caught the show and walked backstage with a wildly different pitch. 50-50 partnership. Palminteri writes and stars as Sonny. De Niro directs his first feature and plays Lorenzo. Sealed with a handshake in the dressing room, and De Niro honored every word. Number 14. De Niro studied Chazz's real dad like a method acting stalker. Now, Hollywood dads usually come in two flavors. There's the emotionally unavailable guy who's staring out the window, and then you've got the warm sitcom father who solves every crisis before the commercial break. Lorenzo Anello is neither. He's quiet, tired, proud, the kind of working-class father who smells faintly like engine grease, a little coffee, and responsibility. That's because Robert De Niro studied the real Lorenzo like he was writing a dissertation on Bronx fatherhood. Since A Bronx Tale was Chazz Palminteri's actual life, Chazz introduced De Niro to his father, Lorenzo Palminteri, a real Bronx bus driver and the emotional blueprint for the character. De Niro made a point of spending time with the real Lorenzo during filming, the way that he's done with countless real-life sources over the years. His posture, speech patterns, the way a working-class father would carry himself after 30 years on that same route. Every small detail mattered, because Lorenzo's power in the movie is quiet integrity, and that only works if every tiny mannerism feels lived in. Chazz said that when his father finally saw the finished film, he was stunned by how completely De Niro had captured him, not just on the surface, but the essence. And there's a second layer to all of this that most viewers never knew about. When De Niro was finishing the most personal father-son movie of his career, he was actually losing his own dad in real time. Robert De Niro Sr. was a respected American painter known for being uncompromising about what was genuine and what wasn't. On May 3rd of 93, his 71st birthday, his father died of prostate cancer, just months before the film came out.
He died on his 71st birthday. He died of prostate cancer.
But I wish that I'd been more, because I think he would have lived. He could have lived till now.
That's why a quiet line appears at the end of the credits, in memory of Robert De Niro Sr. Just a small tribute, but knowing what was happening behind the scenes makes the whole movie sit differently. De Niro was directing a story about a father teaching his son how to live while quietly saying goodbye to his own father. The integrity that he built into Lorenzo wasn't only borrowed from Chazz's dad, some of it walked out of his own family. Number 13, Lillo Brancato got discovered soaking wet at Jones Beach. Lillo Brancato Jr. got discovered in the most aggressively New York way imaginable, at Jones Beach, dripping wet, looking exactly like a teenage Robert De Niro. In the summer of 1992, Brancato was a 15-year-old from Yonkers with no acting school resume. What he did have was an obsessive De Niro fixation.
July 5th at Jones Beach.
1992.
You still remember the year? You still remember the date?
Absolutely.
He spent years reenacting Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, and Cape Fear with his brother. At one point, he grew out his hair and drew fake tattoos on himself to play Max Cady. adorable commitment, or the early warning sign of a kid who watched too much Scorsese unsupervised. On July 5th of 92, casting scout Marco Greco was at Jones Beach handing out audition flyers and approached Lillo's younger brother, Vincent. Vincent passed, but pointed him toward his older brother instead. Then, Lillo walked out of the ocean, a teenage De Niro clone surfacing from the Atlantic like a method-acting sea creature. Greco's brain short-circuited on the spot. Brancato didn't bother playing it cool either. Right there on the sand, he launched into impressions of De Niro and Joe Pesci from Goodfellas, plus the "you talking to me" routine from Taxi Driver. Now, the next day, he was at De Niro's office in the Tribeca Film Center. The crew had been hunting for the right Calogero for over a year, and De Niro locked in fast. Less than 2 months after a random beach day, Brancato was on set in Astoria, headlining his idol's directorial debut. Number 12, a real mob captain called out the movie's most famous scene. Now, A Bronx Tale earned its spot in the Mob Movie Hall of Fame, but former Columbo crime family captain Michael Franzese, a guy with actual receipts on this world, broke down one of its biggest scenes and called it pure Hollywood fiction. You know the scene. Calogero watches Sonny shoot a guy over a parking space, and then the cops line up every wise guy on the block and then march the kid past him, waiting for him to point a finger. The whole neighborhood holds its breath. The drama is unreal, and that realism, according to Franzese, is also unreal. In the Mob Movie Review series, Franzese broke it down piece by piece. Real police, he explained, would never park a 9-year-old face-to-face with a row of, suspected killers on a public sidewalk? That's not investigating a homicide. That's a witness intimidation starter kit. Putting a kid in that spot puts him, his family, everyone he's ever waved to even, in immediate danger. Then there's the gangsters themselves. Franzese pointed out that no actual wise guy would just stand there calmly waiting for a child to decide his fate like a contestant on Mafia Family Feud. Real guys would have evaporated long before the squad car showed up. Palminteri has openly admitted that the moment was a bit dramatized. The goal was never police procedural accuracy. It was Calogero stuck between two worlds. The law on one side, street code on the other, with the whole neighborhood watching to see which way he tips. Number 11. The real Sonny got killed in real life, just like in the movie. The ending of A Bronx Tale almost looked completely different. The studio wanted Sonny to live. Their case was simple. He's a great character. Audiences love him. Why kill the only guy in the movie that people are going to quote for the rest of their lives? Just let him walk away. Give the audience the happy mob movie ending. But Palminteri said no. Hard no. And the reason is actually the heaviest fact in this entire video. The real Sonny, the actual mobster who shot a man in the parking space argument when Palminteri was 9, was killed exactly the way that it happens in the film. Years later, the son of the man that Sonny shot grew up, found him, and put him down in retaliation. Palminteri didn't witness it. He just arrived soon after. Now, the studio didn't know any of this. They were arguing about story structure, and Palminteri was arguing about a man that he actually knew, a man who had taken him under his wing, tipped him in $100 bills, and then died in exactly the way that the script ends. So when the executives kept pushing to soften the ending, the answer wasn't negotiable. Palminteri put it plainly. Sonny has to die. Sonny has to die. It's not a sad ending, it's a catharsis. De Niro backed him completely. The original ending stayed. Real life had already written that scene decades earlier. Hollywood just filmed it. Number 10, the real Eddie Mush played himself and brought his curse along. Now, every neighborhood has that one guy that people swear is cursed, the walking jinx. In A Bronx Tale, that guy was Eddie Mush, and somehow the real Eddie Mush ended up playing himself. The character was based on Eddie Montanaro, a real-life gambler from Palminteri's childhood. His losing streak was the kind of neighborhood legend that earned him a permanent nickname, Mush, because everything he touched turned to it. During casting, De Niro couldn't find a professional actor who could fake the energy. After enough failed auditions, he asked Palminteri whether the real Eddie was still around. He was, so they tracked him down. 63, he's still confidently betting on the ponies. He's still losing, despite roughly 5 decades of contradictory evidence. But De Niro met with him, he saw the personality up close, and then cast him on the spot. Palminteri admitted afterward that he was a little nervous about bringing Eddie onto a movie set, half worried that the curse might tag along for the ride.
Then came opening day of filming for Montanaro. It rained. Of course it did. The crew turned it into a running joke for the rest of production. The universe itself couldn't resist confirming that Eddie Mush's resume was true on day 1. Number 9, De Niro trained like a real MTA driver. Now, De Niro was playing Lorenzo Anello, a New York City bus driver. Most actors in that situation would have gripped the steering wheel for the close-ups, let a stunt double handle the rest of the route, and call it a day. But Bobby, he went a different direction. He went through the full training and earned an actual commercial driver's license so he could legally operate a New York transit bus on real streets, which is the most Robert De Niro thing ever recorded. In Taxi Driver, he got a real hack license and drove a cab. Raging Bull, he trained as a boxer until Jake LaMotta said that he could have gone pro. In Cape Fear, he had a dentist file down his teeth and then recap them after filming. A Bronx Tale, go pass a CDL exam. The licensing process isn't a weekend project either. It takes weeks of training, a written test, a road test, the works. De Niro went through all of it before stepping in front of his own camera. By the time filming started in the fall of '92, the director of the movie was also a legally credentialed bus operator who could have spent his days off picking up a Bronx route, which, knowing Bobby, he probably considered. Number 8, the studio almost killed the movie's most important storyline. Hard to picture A Bronx Tale without Calogero and Jane, but their entire storyline almost got chopped out of the script. During development, multiple voices pushed De Niro to drop the romance. Their argument was that the father-son dynamic between C, Lorenzo, and Sonny was already a complete movie. Why complicate it with a Romeo and Juliet detour? De Niro later recalled being told flat out, that's really a story in itself, but he refused. Jane was the one element that audiences wouldn't expect from a mafia movie, and that surprise alone was enough to keep her in. Without Jane, Calogero, C never actually grows up. Falling for her is what forces him to confront the racism that's baked into the neighborhood that he'd been romanticizing his entire life. The relationship also becomes a moral test for both father figures. Lorenzo, the honest bus driver dad, worries about the real-world dangers that C and Jane could face. Meanwhile, Sonny, the actual mob boss, surprises everyone by being open-minded about it, telling C that if Jane is one of the great ones, nothing else matters. The literal gangster ends up delivering the most emotionally mature advice in the movie. Casting Jane became a massive job. The production launched a nationwide search and pulled in a 16-year-old girl from the Bronx named Taral Hicks, who'd been performing in the off-Broadway musical Mama, I Want to Sing since age 13. She survived more than 10 callbacks and walked into every single one having no idea who Robert De Niro was. Other girls in the waiting room were melting down, but Hicks figured that she was reading for some Italian guy and treated the whole thing like a regular audition. That obliviousness probably saved her. She booked the role, and A Bronx Tale launched a career that ran through Just Cause, The Preacher's Wife, and her cult classic turn opposite DMX in Belly. Not a bad payoff for the storyline that the studio almost cut. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of the most quotable mob movies ever, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Because unlike Sonny's neighborhood crew, we actually want new people hanging around here. All right, let's get back to Uptown. Number 7, Joe Pesci's in the movie, and most people never notice. A Bronx Tale features Joe Pesci in 2 of its most important scenes, and a lot of people watch the movie a dozen times and miss him both times. Pesci plays Carmine, but it's not the kind of role that he was famous for. No screaming, no temper, no funny how energy. Just a quiet older wise guy with a story to tell, which is exactly why the cameo slips past so many viewers. Remember the parking space scene that kicks off the entire movie? Well, 2 cars get into an accident, and one guy grabs a baseball bat and starts swinging. Sonny intervenes, and the bat-swinging guy ends up dead in the street. The man getting beaten with that bat, the man Sonny actually saves by pulling the trigger, that's Joe Pesci. Then he disappears for almost the entire film. He returns at the very end, during Sonny's funeral. C is standing alone over the casket when an older man walks in, gives himself the sign of the cross, and then starts talking. It's Carmine. He tells Calogero that Sonny had saved his life that day on the street and drops a small bomb on the way out. The original fight wasn't even about the parking spot. He never explains what it actually was about, but then he says goodbye and then leaves. That's the cameo. Pesci bookends the entire film as the human reason that Sonny pulled the trigger in the first place, with about 30 seconds of screen time on each end. By '93, De Niro and Pesci had already built one of the most decorated actor partnerships in film history. Raging Bull and Goodfellas, and then of course later you had Casino and The Irishman. Pesci showing up to do a low-key 2-scene role in De Niro's directorial debut was an old friend pitching in. No fanfare required. And it paid off in the most quietly absurd way possible. A Bronx Tale sits at the top of Joe Pesci's filmography on Rotten Tomatoes. Actually higher than Goodfellas, higher than Raging Bull, higher than Casino. The guy who barely shows up scored his best-reviewed movie by accident. Number 6, the firebomb scene came from real friends who actually died. The Molotov cocktail sequence in A Bronx Tale plays like a horror set piece. A car full of teenagers driving into a neighborhood to throw firebombs. Now, one bottle gets caught and then thrown back, and the car becomes a coffin in seconds. C's friends die because Sonny pulled them out of the back seat at the last possible moment. That part is fiction. Sonny didn't actually save Palminteri in real life. But the firebomb, the friends dying, that part wasn't invented. When Palminteri was interviewed about which parts of the movie really happened to him, he didn't dress it up. He said it quietly. The guys died, man. Real friends from the neighborhood. Real Molotov cocktails. Real explosions.
The name changed for the movie, but the bodies didn't. And that's why the scene sits at the emotional gut punch slot of the film. De Niro shot it practically. Actual fire, actual car, no CGI shortcuts. And the choice fits. Stylizing the moment would have been an insult to whoever Palminteri lost. Instead, it kind of lands the way it was supposed to. A sudden, brutal break from the seduction of gang life that the movie spent 2 hours quietly selling. The audience walks in expecting a coming-of-age mob story, and they walk out remembering the car full of dead teenagers. Number 5, A Bronx Tale became a Broadway musical, but decades later. A Bronx Tale becoming a Broadway musical falls somewhere between possible and, Watching the original film, the brain doesn't immediately leap into jazz hands. It's a gritty coming-of-age mob drama packed with racial tension, violence, guys threatening each other over curb space. Yet, over 2 decades after the movie came out, that exact story opened on Broadway with full orchestrations and choreography. The musical premiered at the Paper Mill Playhouse in early 2016 and then opened at the Longacre Theater on December 1st that same year. The original creative core showed up to make it happen. Chazz Palminteri wrote the book so the story could stay locked into the real Bronx childhood. Robert De Niro made his Broadway directorial debut on the project, which had to be terrifying. He co-directed alongside Broadway veteran Jerry Zaks, who had already directed Palminteri's 2007 one-man show revival. Then came the curveball that nobody saw coming. The score was written by Alan Menken. Yes, the Disney legend behind The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast. Glenn Slater wrote the lyrics, and somehow the whole thing worked. The show ran 700 performances before closing in August of 2018, the second longest run in Longacre Theater history. In May 2018, Palminteri himself stepped into the cast as Sonny at select performances. That made him the first actor in history to play the same role across 3 formats: the one-man play, the film, and the Broadway musical. Number 4, most of The Bronx was actually Queens in disguise. Now, most of A Bronx Tale wasn't filmed in the Bronx at all. The bulk of production set up shop in Astoria, Queens, with extra scenes shot in Brooklyn around Gravesend Neck Road. According to Chazz Palminteri, there was a personal reason for skipping his actual childhood streets in the Belmont section. He didn't want to wreck life for friends and family who still lived there. Shutting down those blocks for weeks of filming would have started feuds that outlast the movie itself. Also, by the early 90s, Belmont had also modernized past the 1960s look that the story needed. So De Niro pulled off a full-scale urban illusion. The intersections around 30th Avenue and 44th Street in Astoria stood in for 187th. St. Joseph's Church showed up repeatedly. A nearby Astoria high school doubled for C School. Vintage cars rolled in, period storefronts went up, modern signage came down, and Queens quietly transformed into 1960s Belmont without anyone in the audience noticing. The only sequence actually shot in the real Bronx was the brief City Island scene. One location. That's it. The illusion held because De Niro stacked the movie with real New Yorkers instead of polished Hollywood extras. The accents, body language, corner-of-the-mouth banter, all of it came from people who actually lived it. Number 3, Sonny's iconic door test came from an honest bus driver. Anyone who grew up in the 90s probably watched at least one guy attempt the door test from A Bronx Tale like he just discovered fire. Sonny lays it out for C. Open the passenger door for her, you walk around the car, and watch. If she reaches over and unlocks your side from the inside, she's a keeper. If she just sits there, waiting, move on. Relationship advice delivered like a mob-sponsored Consumer Reports article. But here's the catch. That scene wasn't exactly dreamed up in a Hollywood writer's room. The door test was real, and the moment came directly out of Palminteri's actual Bronx childhood. A Bronx Tale begins as Palminteri's autobiographical one-man play in 1989, and the door test was already in it then. Every story in that show, the murder on the corner, the lineup, the friends in the car, Palminteri lived. So when the test made it into the screenplay, it wasn't pulled from a screenwriting manual. It was pulled from somebody's actual childhood education in how to read a girl across a locked passenger door. That's why the scene still hits 25 years later. The dialogue sounds like a wise guy bit because a wise guy character delivers it, but strip Sonny's voice off of it and you're left with the kind of advice that gets passed down on stoops and over Sunday sauce. The kind of practical, slightly cynical wisdom that Italian-American kids actually grew up with in Belmont in the 60s, which makes the line land harder than any made-up dating tip really ever could. Number 2, Kathrine Narducci showed up for her son and walked out with the role. Now, some Hollywood careers take years of grinding auditions, and some start because you drove your kid to a casting call. In 1992, Kathrine Narducci was a New York mom of 2 with no acting training and exactly 0 professional credits. She showed up to an open call so her 7-year-old son could try out for young C. That was the whole mission. Then she noticed the production was also casting Rosina. Calogero's mother. She asked if she could read after her kid finished, which is possibly the most New York audition pitch ever delivered out loud. Now, De Niro was running casting personally, and after Narducci's first read, he had her drop the script and start improvising scenes with him. Mid-improv, he told her to come sit on his lap. That's less of a movie audition and more like a stress test designed in a lab. Her reaction wasn't trained. It wasn't polished. It was just real, which is exactly the point. She wasn't performing a Bronx mother. She basically was one. She beat out more than 2,000 women for the part. But her son, he didn't get cast as C. That one had to be a quiet ride home. A Bronx Tale became her feature debut. It got her an agent and pushed her into professional classes. The role eventually led to Charmaine Bucco on The Sopranos, permanently exhausted by Artie's midlife meltdowns, and then later turns in The Irishman and Godfather of Harlem. Number 1, the most heartbreaking part of A Bronx Tale, it's not on screen. Now, throughout A Bronx Tale, Lorenzo keeps drilling one line into his son's head. The saddest thing in the world is wasted talent. It's the moral spine of the whole movie, that the choices you make decide which version of yourself walks out the other side. What nobody watching in 1993 could have known is how brutally that line would land on the kid playing Calogero. Lillo Brancato Jr. walked off Jones Beach into the lead role of Robert De Niro's directorial debut. He followed it up with Sopranos as Matt Bevilacqua, a mob hopeful gunned down by Tony himself. He was 20-something with a real career and one of the most iconic Italian-American coming-of-age performances in modern film already on his resume. By the early 2000s, Brancato was in freefall. The career stalled, arrests started piling up, and by December 10th of 2005, he and a low-level Genovese associate named Steven Armento broke into a Bronx apartment looking for prescription pills. The noise woke an off-duty NYPD officer named Daniel Enchitugi, who lived next door. He came out to investigate, and Armento opened fire. Officer Enchitugi was killed. A jury acquitted Brancato of murder in 2008, but did convict him of attempted burglary. He was sentenced to 10 years and served about 8 before being paroled. The kid who played Calogero, Little C, who watched Lorenzo deliver that line about wasted talent on screen, take after take, ended up living the exact warning that his on-screen father had been trying to give him. But the story doesn't end there. Brancato now has been sober for over 15 years. He speaks at schools, he works in recovery programs, and openly accepts his role in what happened that night. He's spoken openly in interviews about wishing that he could bring the officer back, but none of that brings the officer back. But it does mean the kid who once stood next to De Niro on a Bronx sidewalk eventually found his way back to the lesson that the movie was trying to teach him. A Bronx Tale was always a story about a young man choosing between two fathers, two paths, two versions of his own future. Decades after the camera stopped rolling, the saddest version of that story turned out to be real. And the line that broke it open had been sitting in the script the whole time. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird facts about A Bronx Tale. Which fact hit you hardest? Well, drop it in the comments and share this with a friend who still does the door test on first dates. And until next time, this is Remember When.